Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first Finance and Management Committee meeting for this civic year. There's no members of the public present. There's nobody you're expecting to come in, is there? No. The meeting will be recorded and it will be put upon YouTube link. If anybody wants to record the meeting themselves, you're more than welcome to, but we do like to disclose that. We've got no apologies for absence. No. So I think we're all present with the exception of Councillor Kirby. Now I'd ask for a bit of extra time to be allowed for this next item because it's quite an important one, especially for this committee. Sorry, I'm busy with stuff. Just to make everybody aware, we've got a new fire exit here. So in the event of any issues, there's a way out and there's the stairs, and then there's also the lift at the side. But we're just going to have this door open for now, just for a bit of ventilation if everyone's looking. So I'm assuming that everybody has submitted their declarations, their disclosable pecuniary interests. Is that correct?
Yeah. I haven't submitted a new one.
Okay.
No, I don't know the James that time.
As long as the important bit is that they're up to date. We'll have a separate conversation with the clerk, but for us tonight, it's more a case of have you submitted a DPI. The obligation is upon every member to keep it up to date with any changes. If there's anything that comes up on the agenda where you've got a concern that it might affect your interests, whether financial or not, the safest route to go is to declare it and seek advice from the clerk. We do ask to disclose them at the start of the meeting as well, but sometimes it's not always so obvious that you can have them. It rather depends on what crops up. And one of the common areas there where that can happen is on grants. So if there are any disclosable pecuniary interests, make sure you raise them. Okay. So, to consider a written request for new DPI dispensations, well, I've submitted my updated DPI return tonight,
Well, I obviously can't process it. Obviously, it has to go through.
Well, there's
council. So the only one we got to note really is Councillor Barnett's went through service provision last week. So that's such a note. They've already considered that.
So, to consider whether any of the items should be discussed in private session.
I couldn't see anything.
Any items that members think need to be discussed in private? Okay. So, to confirm the minutes of the previous committee meeting. So, to approve the minutes of the Finance and Management Committee meeting held on the 24th of April 2023, numbered 01 to 15 inclusive. Can I have someone to move that? Thank you. Can I have a seconder?
Doesn't how many people were here.
Somebody was there.
Ideally, somebody was there. Who have we got? Well, I might have
you,
to second it. I'll second it then. And can we have a vote, please? To accept. Thank you. So we now need to elect a vice chair of this committee. So. Pat Collins. Do we have a seconder for the nomination of Pat Collins? Thank you. So that's Jenny and Jane. And then.
Can I nominate Isaac?
Isaac. And do we have a seconder for that?
Oh, second.
We've got the second. Okay, so can we start on the vote or do we want to do it split?
Well, do it on the one who was nominated first. If you get
Okay. So, for Councillor Pat Collin to be Vice Chair of the Committee, I'm going to ask for people to vote in favour or against, and then if that's carried, that'll be the end of it. If it's not carried, then we'll move on to taking votes for Councillor Barney. So, all those in favour of Councillor Pat Collin as Vice Chair, please raise your hands. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and myself 6. All against. 2, 4, 6. We've got no abstentions. Does this
You
carried on? Chair's casting
You
vote.
vote again?
Yeah, not ideal, but I'll use my casting vote and we'll have Pat to come in as vice chair. So if you want to come up and take a seat. Okay, so the work of this committee, perhaps more so for new members, it's useful to get an idea about what this committee does or what it doesn't do.
Do you want me to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a committee which, where the sort of difficult, complicated work and the work that takes a lot of time and discussion comes in kind of clumps. There are some months where the committee is much more a kind of making sure that I'm doing things properly and making sure the records are being done properly. And it's probably a little, there's probably not an awful lot of decisions to be made at those times, but there are other times when the grants are done in big clumps. I think we had 30 grants in our kind of February meeting. It's quite involved. We had one meeting where we finished about 11 o'clock a couple of years ago. We've tried to avoid the situations where we had 3 hours meetings because it went on and on and on. We're trying to encourage the people who put in applications to get everything they need to in the application, and because if 30 applications come and need to talk for 3 minutes, that's an hour and a half before the meeting actually starts. So it can get a bit messy. So we're trying to get them to say what they need to in the actual application. They can attend, they can speak. We've got to legally give them that opportunity, but we kind of encourage them not to, I suppose. So that comes in 2 clumps in September and February. The closing date for the next cycle is July the 31st. So, I'll be starting to kind of advertise and kind of prompt people to do that. The other things we've got to do, this committee leads on the kind of budgeting. And I know you've all just started, but you do need to start thinking about the budget for next year. Because each committee's only got like 3 or 4 meetings a year, by the time you have your next meeting, where we say start thinking about your budget, by the time the autumn comes, that's when we need each committee's kind of draft budgets to be submitted. Now they all kind of get collected together, they come back to this committee, and then we kind of, if we can get it through without too much arguments, then it's just kind of put through and recommended to council. There's usually arguments, there's usually kind of horse training where we kind of balance, balance budgets against other budgets. Because you're a new council, your priorities are very likely going to be different from last year's council. So because you're a new council, you individually have new interests. So. Don't be afraid of voting to change things in that kind of way. And then essentially what happens after that is this committee takes it to council, not just about the budgets but about earmark reserves as well. And I know I've had discussions with some chairs of committees and we're trying to be a bit more organised and to think a bit more long term about how we plan things, to try and support groups and organisations that we support in a more kind of holistic way, where they know where they stand and they know where we stand. So we'll come on to those kind of things a bit later. The other things we do are things like we're basically audited by the government essentially. We have to do everything above board in terms of how we account for ourselves. That everything's legal and above board, and that's part of what we're doing tonight is working through those. It's called the AGAR, the Annual Governance and Accountability Term. So that's something we come on to a bit later. Can I just say just a few little other things? And so the other thing is just making sure that you're basically checking me for being being fraudulent. Because the difficulty in terms of anti-fraud we've got at the moment is that I kind of do everything. I could be running away with all the money, and it's kind of important that you keep on top of that. You're checking me, and I do make mistakes. There's been a few mistakes where I paid Viking twice once, and you know, part of your role is try and get used to the kind of accounts paperwork. I know you're looking at the moment going, what's the point of all this kind of stuff? Because a lot of it's kind of just blank paperwork. I do appreciate that, but getting used to it and trying to make sure that I'm on top of what I'm doing, and there are no stupid questions. You can ask me anything you like. I will try my best to answer whatever you want to ask me about. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Any questions?
Can I just ask a quick question, Richard? Sorry, child.
Yeah.
So if, for example, my son plays football at Hepworth Football Club, and I pay a subsidy to them, right? Just a subsidy, because they just play football, they don't do anything else. And they apply for a grant, because they have done previously. I would then go, my son plays football for Hepworth,
Yeah,
I can't vote on this decision.
that is right.
That's
yeah.
correct, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So if, for example, there was someone who was like a member of Cafe 100 or the Tech,
Yeah.
that would be the same situation.
Yeah.
Or Homley, I'm a trustee of Homley Library.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that. That's fine.
Yeah. There are some. We're not quite sure about ones where the parish council owns the asset.
Yeah.
Because it seems a bit silly that Andy can't vote. He is a trustee, so in that sense,
The need to ask for dispensation, granted.
we're talking to our sort of local councils association about. So, but it's certainly the case that you're talking about. They should declare and they shouldn't vote. Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Or speak.
Or speak. Yeah. And there, there are times where we will tell people not. There are times where we have to tell councillors just don't say anything. It's not in their interest.
Well, it doesn't matter to me whether the football club applies for a grant or not. He just plays it, doesn't he?
Well, it is important. So if in doubt, raise it and ask. The issue with it is even if you sit in and don't vote, the fact that you've sat in could complicate matters, and whether you participated or not. We do record the meetings, but it's a lot easier to declare it and to step away from any vote and decision, and then it's clear cut.
Is that in that example with the football club? Is that because Councillor Barnes is saying, look, we get a clear benefit from this?
Yeah.
We are a beneficiary, because in other cases you have links with things that are not beneficial.
Yeah. Okay. So in essence, in that particular example, yes, it's because there's a financial benefit that would accrue to a member's.
It is a membership, so we pay a membership to the club.
So when I say
Yeah.
member, I mean to councillors or to their immediate family. There are other circumstances where it might not be financial. There are circumstances where dispensation would be appropriate, where I forget what the terminology is, but it's something along the lines of if we gave a grant to every school in the Home Valley to do something, well, that wouldn't prohibit councils with children from voting, because actually it's quite remote then what that financial benefit is. But you want to raise that to get it on record, and then if we agree, off we go. And effectively, whilst it's not the clerk or the RFO decision that's final, if there's a concern, if there's an issue and we're not clear, then the clerk RFO is here to guide us. And ideally, when advice is offered, we want to be following it.
Yeah, I think we usually kind of tell you to do things. If it's a grey area, we probably advise just to not vote, just in case. Because if you do vote and people criticise it, it could potentially become an illegal decision, and therefore becomes problematic. So it's probably best just to step aside.
Do you think that, just for clarity, that if you email out the council's expectation of DPI and then everybody's got it and then there's no like, do you know, just,
Well, we won't go on this with it. I think it kind of works with it. So the important bit on your disposable pecuniary interests is that's required by law. So it's not optional. You need to fill it in completely for you and for your spouse or partner. And if something crops up, then you know I suppose the code of conduct and standards would say be forthcoming with the information to allow the client to decide it. But yeah, there'll be something from an ALC that can be circulated.
yeah, because I run like a rural crime group for,
Yeah, you said
but
that.
I do it like completely voluntary, I don't get paid for it,
Yeah.
and I
So
don't get any.
It is one of the items that's on the council training and induction session, but I think it'd be useful to if there's a handy guide or something like that to circulate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll move on. So, item 24. Grants. So number one, to note the parish council's grant process. So before I pass over to Richard, just to say, our website contains lots, if not all, of our procedures and policies and grant process. Grants have been tweaked a little bit over the years, and in advance of the grants meeting, it'll be really helpful if all members have actually read that grants policy and criteria, just to be familiar with it. And on that, I'll hand over to Richard.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There was an awful lot of information on this this grant sheet. I was more showing you the amount of grants that the parish council gave out in 1 year last year. It's quite involved, as you can see. We gave out 77 grants, totaling £170,000 last year. As this is laid out, is the earliest grants are towards the bottom of the page, and the more recent ones are at the top. So we've only given one grant out this year, which is the one to Chopard's as a coronation lunch grant. So that's the only grant that's come out. And I just wanted to point to you to the columns on the right, which shows you how much is in each grant pot. So this committee's essentially got two pots, projects and it's probably best to start with the other community assets grant, which is it's got £53,000 in. The maximum that can be awarded by this committee is £5,000. If you want to pay more than £5,000, you can, but it basically goes as a recommendation to council, and council will either agree to it or not, essentially. But you do have the option. We haven't done that very often. Maybe once or twice, but it is there as a possibility. So that's got 53,000 in, and it's essentially for buildings or for outdoor spaces or a large piece of equipment, for example. So in terms of buildings, we've given money to replace boilers, to replace roofs. What did we do at the football club now? It was a lady changing.
Was it batteries?
Batteries. Solar panels and solar batteries, yeah. And then in terms of big equipment, we supplied like a PA broadcasting system to a theatre group in Honley, and to outdoor spaces we've given grants to Cinder Hills Park, basically. I think we paid for. Did we pay for like a path? Did we pay for a path there or something?
Yes,
So it's kind of permanent things. I know permanent is a long time, but it's basically the long term things.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
It's a
Yeah.
question, yeah. So, Cafe 100 here, this is why I brought Cafe 100 earlier, because when I looked on the grants thing, because it scrolls on the homepage from
Yeah.
it says here, running costs and wages. So we paid the running costs and wages for Cafe 100. I get it's a youth facility and it's a charity,
Yeah.
but where do you because there's a lot of charities, there's more charities than hairdressers, that's rare. So, what are hairdressers in over? So it's a youth project, running costs, staff wages, it's a charity, I get that. But should we be paying staff's wages?
I mean, these are things for you. So this is part of why you're here, is to argue about these points. This is.
If I do some charity work I do it for free.
Yeah.
Volunteer, like Homley Library you were on about, we have volunteers and we can't keep it going if we can't get the volunteers. Cafe 100, if the, I don't know anything about it, so I plead my ignorance. I just, the bit that, the running costs and the staff wages, if we can't make it work, should we be floating it? Can we not move it to the Civic Hall and they pay a little peppercorn rent and run it from here? Because I've been in Jorrit Dane, it's quite quiet, and you know, even the tech building or something.
Okay, so I think in general terms, we help fund these activities, but there are some items on here that do include costs. One of the discussions that the previous council had was about where that best sits. So where the projects, where there does need to be staff time, it sits better within service provision of making sure that there's a detailed and coherent approach to it. Whereas with grants, no, in the main, and certainly historically, the focus was on helping local community groups. So one of the things that had always flagged up issues was around paying wages. You've picked on an interesting one there because that sits right in the middle of everything. So
Yeah, it's because it did it the further up as well. So they borrowed money in September on the 12th, and then they borrowed money on the 10th of October. So youth facilities, we've given them 4,290 of the youth facilities.
So they haven't borrowed anything. They've been
Given it.
They were
Yeah.
given a grant.
Yeah, they've been awarded
Yeah, but
grants.
they've been given a grant of nearly 10 grand in space of 30 days.
Yeah, and so what we're not going to be doing in this meeting is going into individual grants and
No, I'm
discussing.
just
I get that. I do. Lawrence?
I was just going to say it is an interesting one because under service provision we are actually going through a programme currently of reviewing on a wider scale the youth service provision in the area. So that might well get rolled in, and we have formed a working group just at the last meeting.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we did the working party came to the conclusion that things like that, which are regular, because there's work that goes on at the Phoenix Centre and all sorts with young people around the area, should go into service provision. There's quite, all the youth stuff has been put together with rather a big budget, and there is a review going on of how that is to be dealt with, and what our expectations are of them. So it's very unlikely that we'll get grant applications to this committee now that are for the youth provision, because it's all kind of being coordinated and pulled together and sorted. But some of the people, when you say salaries, some of them of course are professionals, because these are youngsters, you can't just have volunteers.
No, but charity's a charity, isn't it? I mean, I'm
Yes,
a
but people are
professional.
allowed to earn salaries in a charity.
I used to work for a charity and I was paid. It rather depends upon what it is what the activity is, what the rationale for it is. But ordinarily, within the grants that we're going to be looking at, in the future, I don't think we'll be seeing much in the way of wages. Well, the whole point about it is when that grant request comes in, you need to consider the details on that. You need to consider it on its merits. So that's the whole bit about not being predisposed towards something. So you need to be objective and you need to form your own judgment on it and to share that with colleagues, and then we vote on it. It's that simple. But it might be a good time to move on to part 3 then, which is the ones that we will be considering as to whether to make to.
Can I just make one?
Sorry, yeah.
Because I only really mentioned about the community asset side of things. So the other grants pot that this committee looks after is well, it's basically all of the grants in a sense. It's traditionally been called projects and events, but it's essentially anything that doesn't fit into a community asset. So it's anything that's not a building or a large piece of equipment or an outdoor space. It's lots of kind of festivals come through that committee, or if you've got a project, like an art project, we've had, what was that? Message in a bottle. This the one of Lions. Do you know
Yes,
what that
I've got
is?
one.
That called,
If they
it was like a,
they make a little jar and you write in it if you,
it was for
your
vulnerable people,
drugs and
essentially.
your allergies.
So
and you
information
stick a
about
thing on your
where your
fridge.
drugs are, if you've got any so you stick the label on the outside of your fridge, and if the ambulance or the police break in, they see that and they know how to help you basically. So those kind of things what go through that committee. There's 20,000 in that, maximum of 1,500 per award. That went up, if you remember, from 1,000.
Okay.
Can I,
Yes.
Can I just ask, just in terms of the layout, I just want to, Rich, if you could just go through what you were saying about, you've got all the charities down the left-hand side, and then along the top, you've got the different budgets.
Budget pots, yeah.
Yeah. So a budget pot would be, like Home First Tech would be a budget pot.
Yeah, well, there's no money in that. There's no money in that pot
Right.
this year.
Okay.
There was last, in fact, no, there wasn't last year. The year before last, there was money in the pot, but there hasn't been the last couple
So
of
these
years.
would be sort of historic.
Yeah, I mean, money. We did pay them money from an earmark reserve last year, as you can see.
Right.
10,000 was to pay for an accessible kitchen, 5,000 for energy costs.
And do we own that building?
No.
It's a community owned building. So a lot of the grants that's going to come in for the community assets, they will be community owned spaces.
Yeah.
Projects and events is what it says, so they tend to be they're not.
Well,
I think what the word, they're not physically.
on the open gardens, I don't know whether they had a grant for that, but that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
You
know.
Garden festival, film festival, arts festival, folk festival, and
But
all sorts of
your projects and events will tend to be something this financial year, something that's going to happen, and then it's going to end. Whereas your other assets, well, the idea of lending, of making the grant, is that will improve that facility for the long term. Okay.
So these can change from year to year then, these pots?
it's part of your budgeting process. That
Right.
if your priorities as a council are different than last year's, which they should be, because you're a different council, you can decide as a committee, as a council, to move money from reserves, create new pots as you see fit, basically.
So whilst the budget
No,
for this
yeah.
year has already been set,
Yeah.
that informs future years, but it rather depends on what occurs during the course of business as to whether or not we review things.
Yeah, and in terms of our accounts, we have to keep them on. If we paid them anything from last year, we have to keep them on this year, even if we give them no money. It's just the way we have to do it, unfortunately.
So just to pick up one of the points where we said, so we'll move on to part 3. Just to pick up one of the points where we mentioned before about how we have some recurring grants coming in. Well, within the Finance and Management Committee, a lot of those are those annual festivals and events. So one of the thoughts that we'd had from the previous council was that a lot of effort goes into asking for this money, and we've been long-term supporters of those events. So we're treating them very much like a one-off event, whereas actually we have a long-term relationship with them, and it would be relatively simple to give a decision about whether we want to support them on into the future as well, so they've got that surety of knowing that money's going to come through. So service provision have got a slightly more difficult job, because on service provision, the amounts involved, if you aggregate them, will push them through into the tendering process, or they will put them through into I guess it'd be a case of if it's not tendering, it'll be a form of contract. We don't have that difficulty on finance and management, because the amounts involved that we tend to look at for where we're going to be having recurring items will be well below that threshold. So Rich has kindly identified some of the key ones So, the suggestions were the Home Firth Folk Festival, the Home Firth Arts Festival, the Festival of Folk, Home Valley Patient Transport Scheme, Home Firth Christmas Team, the Honley Business Association Christmas Lights, Honley Business Association for CCTV, and the Home Firth Tech.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What we're saying they should do is that we should say we'll give them a probably 3-year grant, because it'll fit within one council. But that they don't have to do a new application every year, but they do have to put in updated accounts every year, because we have to make sure we're dealing with financially a well-run organisation.
Do we have disclosures of who's on these teams, like a breakdown of them? And the other concern is, although Home Firth Tech is like a cooperative community building, it's a limited trust, it's a limited company as well, and they do have like other supporters. I just think that they're just like £5 for gas bill when it's supposed to be carbon neutral, and like £10,000 for an accessibility kitchen. I get that people need to have accessibility to a kitchen, but why is it our job to like do that when we could have spent that money somewhere else?
Well, that is for you to argue and vote. That's the whole part
When
of
the
the
grant
process.
applications come in, these are the discussions we
But
have.
you're talking about including these people saying, oh yeah, we'll give you so much as a rolling amount every year.
Okay, so for the majority of these, where they've been having support from the parish council year in, year out for perhaps the last 10 years. So there's the idea is that rather than to go through that process each year, which takes a lot of council time, officer time, but also we've got community events where we've been keen to support them, and yet what we're asking them to do is to complete a lot of paperwork each year when they're also applying for grants from elsewhere.
I get that, but
So I haven't finished, thanks. I'll let you come back, but just let me finish. So the idea with these is that there's been that long-term support. The previous council had the view that they would wish to, if you like, make those recurring payments for ease and simplicity. It's this council's choice to decide whether to do that. Now, you raised the point earlier about, do we know how each of these, who's involved in them, what the issues are? Well, there's a lot of new faces here. So whilst this council has helped those groups over the last 10 years, that level of knowledge isn't shared universally amongst us all. So it might well be a case of, through this year, I think it'd probably be prudent to decide on a case-by-case basis when the grant requests come in, whether or not we want to make it, whether there's going to be a grant at all, if there is going to be a grant, how much it is, and then whether or not that's just an in-year grant, or whether we're going to decide to make a commitment to future years. So I'll come back to you now, Jim.
it's just that when I was in Home Firth after the Festival of Folk, I was talking to a couple of business owners, Nellie's Wooden Workshop and the people on the Hollow Gate, because I do shop down like that side of Home Firth, and they said that they didn't even take £20 from the Home Firth Festival of Folk because the road was closed, so they didn't take anything. Like there's quite a few shops that weekend who took no money at all. So for the instance of the Festival of Folk, although I'm not against it at all, because everyone goes down and gets pissed and it's quite good fun, right? The thing is that I think that might be a way of working forward that there is no impact on the business, so there is no, we're not supporting something that's impacting on people who have 365 businesses to run.
So we don't manage and deliver a lot of things, but one of the thoughts is certainly within service provision, if we bring these items closer to us, we can actually heavily influence how they're delivered. Now that's more relevant on service provision, in particular around youth provision, where the council's looking to set up arrangements with the Youth Alliance to provide youth services throughout the valley. But in a similar vein, there's opportunities within the grant requests. But historically, that has very much been down to individual councillors getting involved on those projects to help. So it's not really a case of telling them how to go about doing it. If people want to get involved in it, then it's a case of stepping forward to get involved. And there's always those kind of issues. So whatever, I've not known a single event where somebody thinks it's brilliant because it brings their footfall and everybody's buying the stuff that they sell. And at the same time, you'll have other shops where that's not the case. So Hollygate used to be a classic example. My friend ran Wheelsbrook Motors. No festivals brought them extra business. But Terry still supported a lot of them because he thought it was good for her own fair. So you've got those issues. Some of it might be in the balance. We don't get into that kind of operational detail in making the grants. But certainly if members want to get involved in those projects, then that's a worthy thing to do. You got anything you want to add to that?
No, I think your point is probably quite sensible, really. Rather than sorting things tonight, is just getting them to apply, and then we take it from there, whether they're invited to apply for a sequence of years.
Okay. So, as and when we start to hear them, when's the next one? Is it September?
September's in
Yeah.
the next goal.
So for September, what I'm going to ask the client to do is for any of those grants that pop up on September 1 that might be appropriate for us to consider as to whether to make them multi-year, just to flag that one. Anything else with that?
No,
No?
I think that's
Okay.
it. Do you want to get them to vote on that as a process?
Well, then that would be sensible, wouldn't it?
Could I just
Yes, sorry Andy, you indicated.
fully understand the process then? So what we're saying is let's take a group like the Home First Christmas team. They might say, okay, we'd like to apply for a 3-year grant in effect, 3 one-year grants.
Yeah.
So we get all the information for the 3 years, will we?
No.
We only get it for the first year.
Effectively, yeah.
We
And
would
have we
ask them
made
to
it
put
commit-
new accounts in every year so that we know they're financially
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. But have we made a
But that's all.
commitment to the next 2 years?
Okay, so that's the point about it. So what we would get is this year's grant request.
Yeah.
Okay, with this year's amount. And then the decision we would have is, do we approve that grant? And are we going to tell them that we'll also provide that grant going into the future on the basis of the information we've got for this year? So it's entering into the commitment for it. And then in terms of following it up, it's a question of, well, we need to decide what information do we want. So ordinarily on grants, you'd be asking them to confirm that they've spent the money on what they said they were going to do. If we enter into a recurring arrangement, we might be wanting them to say, send in your yearly income and outgoings, so we can see what's going on. I guess the advantage is converting it from a apply and we'll think about it to saying we'll fund it and we'll monitor it, and it allows the group to focus, if you like, on delivering it and was that really on delivering it and on raising the funds from elsewhere, because nearly all the organisations that we fund, we're only putting a fraction of the money.
Can I ask, Charles, how much more work is involved in a resubmission than there's a reconsider? Obviously, we would want to see their books financially going forward for the
Just
next
an
year.
update, yeah.
I mean, in principle, I think it's quite sensible to consider them as a regular option. But I also think legally we've got a due diligence to go through each time there, and we need to look at the change within their organisation and potentially how that reflects upon the parish council. So, in theory, I think it would give the confidence for these groups to go ahead and plan for next year, knowing they have that there. But I also think that we should have that within our remit to make sure we offer them proper scrutiny before we go down that road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in terms of timelines then, for you and for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways it's about cutting down the work for them rather than us. you know, because it's quite a lengthy process assembling everything together for a grant application. I totally understand what you mean. In terms of what we do, I mean, we've got feedback, grant feedback form, which basically says how they've spent the money and lays out, you know, a list of all their invoices and receipts and stuff like that. So I suppose we'd just be developing that kind of things, and including the sorts of things you said about any changes to the constitution or the makeup of boards and so on and so forth.
Well, with my analysis of the process there, is it not possible for them to copy paste the majority of this into the forms, and we accept the fact that their general business is the same as last year, and we really just consider any changes. So we look at the structural changes, the financial changes, and if there's any change to what they're planning to do with it, they're more sensible option. If you give us the overview, we can agree that we support the overview, but the structure I think needs to be.
That is something we discussed last year as part of the working group, and I did say to them, you know, if we did have these grants that we do get every year, I did say to them a couple of years ago, just get an idea in your head of something that you always are going to want. Apply for that, keep the template, and just, you know, recycle it every year. We moved away from that. We thought there was more sense in, you know, this kind of rolling cycle. But I do understand where you're coming from.
Thomas?
I would like to see just a little bit more in terms of what comes back from them, in terms of their outputs, if you like. And it doesn't have to be in any great depth, but more than just the numbers, I think. And looking through this list, I think just about every one of these organisations will be doing that anyway for themselves, you know, as they go into the following year. How was it last year? You know, let's review it and.
We do ask for a narrative. I mean, the ones who you know, who send us perfect, you know, who send us a follow up with photographs and a narrative of how the day's gone. It asks how many people benefited from the event. Did it, you know, tries to say what groups, you know, the elderly, the young, the disabled, and so on and so forth.
Is that on Lawrence's theme? Is that not something we could add to the promotion of the obviously parish council? You know, to say, and afterwards these are the pictures they've got, and the requirement for them to submit something to us, so we can actually support these issues.
The assistant clerk posted some pictures on Facebook last week, I think, of some of the coronation lunches and parties and stuff that we funded last month, is it? And that, you know, there were some lovely photographs there. So we do publicise. That's part of the reason the assistant clerk was appointed, for her to be looking at that kind of things a bit more systematically, the kind of engagement with the public.
So some of this might become clear when you start looking at some of the grant requests and some of the information that's in there, and actually some of the questions that pop up which aren't covered by the grants process. So on item 3, we've got consider identifying community groups to be invited to receive a rolling grant. So the proposal effectively from myself is to consider that on a case by case basis when those grants come in. So we have a seconder to that. Okay, and then all those in favour of adopting that approach? Okay.
Can I just ask a question which I probably should have asked before we voted on it? The application form for a rolling grant, will that be applied for differently to one-off grant?
No,
It will be the same process.
Yeah, it'll be for
But
us to decide.
when you say they will be invited to apply for a rolling grant, is it they'll do that on the standard form?
Yeah.
It was going to be simpler. The renewal one was going to be simpler. That was the whole point. To save them 3 or 4 hours of cutting and pasting.
Well,
I appreciate the discussions of the working group, but it'll be for the committee to make that decision when we get there. So the proposal that we've taken and approved is that we'll consider these on a case by case basis when we get into them. So we will be the ones deciding whether or not they're rolling. If we can also have, so the other proposal from the chair is that the clerk will identify suitable grants in that process for us to consider for rolling. So that's a proposal from myself. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you. And then can we show of hands all in favour? Thank you. So again, for Rich to flag those up. I'm not entirely sure about the next bit, which is to consider which committee would oversee the rolling grant process, because I'd assume that would be us.
Well, I put it there only because obviously some of the things mentioned here are not part of this committee's remit, i.e. the CCTV, Christmas lights.
Do they follow the service provision?
Well, at the moment they follow under service provision. I think there is logic for them to be in one place, and I think there's more logic to be here than there. Service provision, I think, has got an awful lot to do separate to these, which should be easier to manage now anyway, I would have thought.
So which one specifically you're looking at? CCTV?
Well, there's a few, isn't there? Honey Business Association Christmas lights, Home for the Christmas team, the CCTV,
So when did the question for those finances come in?
and the patient transport. Sorry, the
So
patient
can I ask
transport.
what that patient transport is, because the
Well,
ambulance
just-
service do that, don't they?
No, okay.
Sorry.
It's alright, we're not going off at tangents, we're just going to draw this back. So, Rich, will these be coming in as grants? The CCTV, or is that,
They have done. They were done this year just gone.
Well, from what we've already chosen to adopt, effectively, if a grant request comes in to this committee, we will be the ones deciding it. So if these come in front of us, then we'll be looking at that. If not, then they'll be coming in front of service provision, and it'll be service provision's choice then as to whether to make that decision or to remit it to us, won't it?
Yeah,
But,
that was my point. Yeah.
okay, so my proposal again from the chair, so I'll be looking for a seconder, is that we will make this decision on the grants that come to us, and we'll leave service provision to run its own committee. So do I have a seconder for that? All in favour? Okay. So we had some hands up. Is there any hands standing that want to come back in to make any comments? Are we okay to move on?
Can I just say that obviously there has to be some consistency across committees in terms of that approach. So as you know, we're already looking at this in terms of some of those bigger items of spend, the assets and so on, within service provision. So that will go to the next meeting.
So Lawrence is the chair of service provision. So as chair of F&M, all I would request is if service provision thinks there's something within its sphere that's more suitable for F&M, to flag that up nice and early and to hand it over nice and early, so there's no issues around extended delays in making decisions about providing support. Because for some of these events, if that happens, unfortunately the event can have been and gone before we've formed a view on it. So if there's anything that you think should sit with us, you can help find that out.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And then just make sure we get it for the right meeting. But I think it's really it is really important that we have a consistent approach, and I guess some of it will depend upon those arrangements and relationships that service provision are wanting to build up, and then on our part, what grant requests we receive. Okay. So, part 4 now. The next grant cycle of this committee will be in September 2023. Closing date July 31st. Anything else to add to that, other than to say, members, you're more than welcome to encourage people to apply, to make community groups aware of what these grants are. It's important that we don't just see the same old faces. If there's new events, new organisations wanting to get started, then we are a source of financial assistance.
The idea behind these two months of February and September, where we get them all in a big clump, was just so you could measure them against each other. We do have a finite amount of money, and when they were coming in dribs and drabs, quite often we were giving money here and you getting towards the end of the year and there was little left to give out. So it was trying to, so you could measure competitive, because grants are essentially competing for a small pot. And you need to be thinking not just about which grants are worthy, but also about whether they're worthy in the context of the overall budget.
Yeah.
So do we separate that processing it to cash amounts.
Well, no.
So you say half of it's.
No, well, we didn't last year. I mean, there was something I suggested in the committee. I mean, it got voted down. I think the point of view of the committee then was that if it all went in one go, it all went in one go.
So
That was where
it
that
was,
where
more
that
about,
lay.
it was more about being mindful, shall we say,
Yeah.
of where we
Has that
were.
arisen? Has it been an issue in the past that we've spent 80% of the money in the first batch and we've
No,
It hasn't really, funnily enough, although when we discussed whether we should say, well, we'll keep half back, there was a concern something really something we really want to support might come up, but it never has. I mean,
well, experience tells us otherwise, and that's fine.
not in the last 3 or 4 years, I mean.
No.
I was thinking that it might be useful to circulate the report of the Grants Working Party to all members of this committee. I mean, I realise that we're not bound by the findings of that committee.
No, but we're
But
helping
on
farm.
the other hand, there was a lot of work went into it, and there's some quite useful stuff on things that we will accept, we will want to accept, and things that we didn't want to accept. So obviously, it probably needs, it might need a review, but it would be useful to.
Yeah, that would be really helpful background information. So, and it's a case, I suppose, of being mindful to it and keeping an eye on it. My experience has been, until very recently, every year we fell short of giving out the grants. That's one of the reasons why we've been so keen on pushing and encouraging them, although we have increased the amounts over time. But
We did have one last year. We got down to 0 pence. There was no money left in it at all. And then for the first time in history, we got money back. Rock Old Village Hall gave us back 200 quid.
so it is one of those of keeping an eye on things, but at the same time, people are coming forward with ideas and suggestions. We don't know what's going to come in front of us in February. So that's the tricky bit of we will have to make the decision if there's something that we say no to in September, and then there's lots of space left over in February, we could have supported something. But equally, if we get lots of requests in September and spend the budget out when February rolls round and we've got no money, then we'll be saying no to everybody. So it is one of those to be mindful to. And I'm absolutely certain when some of these grant requests come in, we'll be having some active debates on some, and I'm absolutely certain that on others it'll be relatively simple and straightforward. But that's the nature of the grants, and that's the nature of if you like, considering them on the individual merits. Okay. Yeah. So, item 25, list of irregular payments.
Right, so
You list out accounts for payment 20. Oh, sorry.
no. So, as you probably understand, I mean, the parish council can be quite slow moving in its processes because we only have so few meetings and decisions have to be made collectively over things. Sometimes it's difficult making sure people are paid in a timely fashion. Because normally to get things paid, they have to go through a committee and be voted on collectively, either by this committee or by full council. And we don't have those every month, so it can be so there are sometimes times where I have to not pay people for sometimes a couple of months, which I think is a bit ridiculous, but this is just the way council processes are. One way around this is to create a list of regular payments. Now, regular payments are essentially payments that they tend to be, as you will see, things like subscriptions for things and electricity bills and phone bills and payments to the maintenance contractor, things that we know are going to come around anyway. They're not out of the ordinary stuff. The out of the ordinary stuff still needs to come to here, it still needs to come to council. So this is for things that are more regular. I'm not allowed to just pay them. They still have to be signed for by mandated councillors, which this year, as you're probably aware, is the chairs of committee. So we've got 5 there.
So before we started, myself and Councillor Wilson signed separate kidneys and lungs.
So they basically signed for the regular payments of things which were on essentially last year's lists. And so this is basically reviving those, but it was basically because there's a few new things. The one that I forgot to put on the actual agenda, or I hope I put it in the list, yeah, I did, is Honley Library. Obviously we pay Honley Library's running costs to keep them going. So the fact that they were having to come to council or here to get money seemed a bit silly really. So by putting them on the list, what that means is they can go to service provision who oversees them, and they can approve expenditure of £5,000 each time basically. So that can be done in one go, you see, rather than it going to council and F&M, which I think sensible. And then the other one was again the officers. We do end up paying for things out of our pockets. We do get it back, but there are various things that, because the council doesn't have debit cards and so on and so forth, I tend to have to pay for things like Dropbox or Microsoft 365 or our various things that you can only buy online. So that's the reason I'm on there, and Jenny's on there. But obviously we've got an assistant clerk now, so it's just to make sure that if she's paying things out of her pocket, which obviously she paid for petrol to get to training sometime this month, so it's to make sure that she's not out of pocket for stuff that she's paid on behalf of the council. So that's the point with the list of payments. So I don't know whether people have got any questions about it.
Isaac?
You know, on the list of regular payments, on the long-term contracts on the table I just saw, it says Scottish Water. Should that say Yorkshire Water?
I'm afraid not.
We were especially pumped down.
I'm afraid it should say Scottish Water. We get our water from Scottish Water in the toilets. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
It's still likely to be the same water you'd have bought from Yorkshire Water.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the Lecky Bill, isn't it?
I wouldn't be surprised if they're not owned by the French, to be honest. It's probably not even Scottish water.
I've done this once and some come for the pipes.
From my perspective, it seems like just common sense. I mean, obviously, as long as it's accountable and there are receipts and the rest of things, people require to know them, it could be scrutinised and all this.
Yes,
It
exactly.
makes an awful lot of sense just to do it that way rather than
We were encouraging Councillor Wilson earlier, weren't we, to make sure that he was wasn't signing his life away.
Yeah, it is important rather than just, so joking aside, it is important to check what you're signing rather than just assume. The whole point of it is these are kind of fail-safes and follow-ups to make sure that everything is in order. But I will take your comment as actually a proposal to move it.
do so.
Do we have a seconder, please? Lovely. All in favour? Thank you. So item 26, accounts for payment.
Not a ton of stuff to say to me this actually.
So just to start off, this isn't my £1,000, so we'll start off on item 1. It's for the chair
it's for Councillor Blacker, chair of council.
of the council.
So essentially she has £1,000 that she can use for all sorts of different things. It's quite often used for sort of relatively ordinary things. We've had quite a lot of former councillors who died in the last couple of years. So the chairman's expenses is quite often used for flowers and
Attending civic events, so
that kind of stuff.
if Kirkburton Parish Council are having their civic dinner, then it might be a case of paying for the tickets to attend that. What else has been reads that come from?
Councillor Blacker can put on her own civic event. It's up to her. Obviously, last year's chairman put one on. Previous chairs have not. It's kind of a matter for her decision, basically. But it's just to note that anyway. It's something there's no decisions to be made on. The second two both say to no, but in fact, both of them are to no in a sense because the second one is it's no in the sense that those things have already been paid. So it's to no in that sense. The third one is the payments for this.
So just on, are there any questions on item 2? which is to note the completed draft schedule of payments for May 23rd. Okay, sorry, which kind of...
Yeah, I
One
don't
item through.
think there was anything particularly controversial. Yeah, and then the third. So normally with the consider one, if there's an out of the ordinary payment, that will crop up there because it will be this committee basically approving it, and only after that point can I pay it. I have to wait for this committee to give the go to pay it. However, this month there aren't any out of the ordinary payments. They're all on our list of regular payments from last year, BT, the people who run our website and our emails, payment to me for Zoom, our accounts package and our photocopiers. So there's not actually anything to approve, only to note
For this, for F, yeah?
for F.
So these are the ones that myself and Councillor Wilson signed for earlier this evening. Okay.
No, that's not true.
Are they not?
No.
I thought these were.
Did you check those things before you signed?
Yeah.
What do you
Well,
think you signed?
Some of them were. I mean, there's later ones. There's later ones in that.
Yeah, okay. Alright. I'll take the break.
You wouldn't pay the BT's a direct debit anyway, so you
I was
don't.
looking at the emails.
Yeah, you pay for those two, but not that one or that one or that one.
I believe you. So we're just noting that F, yes?
Yep.
Okay. So then, on to item 27, financial statements. To note the...
We're not just noting it, we're considering approving it.
Sorry.
No,
The client would just-
I said it doesn't need to be
right.
approved. It doesn't need to be considered because there's no decision to be made. Actually, it's just to know. I thought it would be to approve, but it's not.
So, item 27, financial statements. To note the accounting summaries, copies enclosed.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, particularly to the new councils, this must look very confusing and boring and what am I looking at, so on and so forth. These are things that I have to share with you because we're told to by our auditors. It's just what we have to share with you to be above board. In terms of some of them, in a sense, they're almost pointless. Like the bank reconciliations are, in a sense, almost pointless because bank reconciliations are only important if you've got money that's kind of in transit, i.e., if you've got a cheque. If you paid somebody a cheque but they've not put it into your account, that's when a bank reconciliation comes in. But we used one cheque last year, so we've never been unreconciled apart from that 1 week. So the rest of the time, our bank book and our bank statements always match completely. So there's a point in, I can see why people would be rather confused by the bank reconciliations where there's 75 at the top, there's 75 at the bottom. They are virtually pointless, but I have to share them with you. The cash books, once you're more attuned to what's going on, it's just helpful if you keep an eye on what's going on. Try and look out for potential mistakes. Look for things that look a bit iffy. If you think that things are more than you expected, if you see the same amount twice, anything like that. Keep an eye on anything like that. I'm a human being. So try and treat me as somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, basically. To keep an eye on what I'm up to for the sake of the council.
So it's interesting enough what you said that we only did one check last week. When I started, electronic banking was almost like not allowed. It was everything was by check, which did make accounts quite difficult.
That was true beginning of the last council still. I think we only used backs in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, not quite getting up to date. Jane?
Can I just ask, because I'm slightly ignorant of all these accounts, what's meant by a bank reconciliation?
Well, that's kind of what I just said. So a bank reconciliation. So we have a bank book which basically records all our income, all our receipts, and all our expenses, all our payments, basically. What a bank reconciliation does is it matches our book record with a bank statement. They will, in our case, they will almost always be the same. That's why they're always the same on this. But like I've just said, in the old council, they might have had thousands of pounds in random cheques flying around here, there, and everywhere. But we did have, you know, a couple of years ago, we had cheques where people didn't do anything with them for like 6 months. There was another time where we gave them some money and they just didn't use it, just kind of sat somewhere. So for that whole time, you know, our reconciliations were out because of that, basically. So that's what bank reconciliation is.
And that
for.
makes sense, yeah.
Okay.
So do we have any more questions on bank reconciliations, cash books, trial balance, balance sheet, cash and investment reconciliation, or the VAT return? Is it worth just going through these?
Yeah, that comes up.
Or we've got our own spot?
Yeah, that's right.
So, part 2, income and expenditure by budget heading. So, councillors to review the draft income and expenditure report for the financial year to date. Have you given me the roll-up version?
Yeah, that's
Right,
all.
thank you.
Yeah,
So, privileges of being chair. You want to
So this is basically where we are at the moment. So your role as a committee, or one of your roles, is to look to make sure that things are not over budget, or that they're not over budget in proportion to where we are in the year. You can see that we've got some things where, you know, you probably saw in my thing that I was outrageously under in terms of the amount we were going to get from interest, because we've already earned 66% of the interest that I calculated that we would for the entire year, so we're already more than half. So, you know, that wasn't too clever, but, you know, the interest rates haven't been going up. And then other things, you notice that the insurance is rather over 128%. That was because when we set the budget up, which was months and months ago, it was kind of set up in November and agreed in December. We hadn't taken over Honley Library at that point, so Honley Library's factored into that. That's why there's more money come out of that than we expected. So part of your role is really to keep an eye on these kind of things, make sure that we're under budget, not just under budget, but our budget is to be spent. So you're having to make sure that we're spending money appropriately as well as saving money appropriately.
Richard, insurance has gone up 30% across the board anyway, so
Well,
like,
yes,
you know, like experience that's like
Fair point.
undercalculation.
Fair point.
From experience, I assure you.
And then on the income side, as you can see, we get our income from Kirklees in 2 payments. One we get at the beginning of May and one at the beginning of November. And we've got exactly 50% of the precept and 50% of this sort of special grant they give us.
So the special grant is a calculated amount for, if you like, the overlap between what Kirklees would do if there was extra, if there wasn't a parish council. I think that's right, isn't it? Or is that
Well, no, it's things that we do that Kirklees would normally do.
That's
So they give us money to compensate.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the people at Home Valley would be paying twice for the same things. Not quite sure what that is, but that was the calculation.
Yeah, well, so the word, so some of it would be some of the grass cutting, some of the benches, wasn't it? So
Benches, bus stops.
So all they would do is the minimum statutory. So that's how that's worked out. But it's
Calculated rather than.
we're getting what we're given. There's no debate over it.
They don't write it line by line.
No. Well, every now and again they will review it, but they set it and then we get it.
Yeah, and then other things, the toilets, the donations to the toilets are, they really dropped during COVID, obviously, but they're picking up slowly, so we're doing quite well with that. We've had all the income from the allotments, we've had all the income from the garages. We had to chase one chap, but that's all come through now.
So the garages it's just Hon, is it?
No, there's Honley and up Dunford Road.
Okay.
We've got like maybe six garages. Something like that.
And the allotments are Home Village, isn't it?
Going Home Village, yeah, we've got probably 10 allotment plots. And then we've obviously got the shop unit next door to the toilets. He is very, very quick at paying for stuff. He's always on time. He's got a direct debit or a standing order set up to pay us, so we don't have sort of problems with having to pass to that.
So that's the outside building.
Yeah, that's going to go outside. We did receive 1,700 back from Honley Junior Football Club, that's what we call it.
That's right, yeah.
For a grant we played last year, they don't really want to go into it too much, but they decided they didn't want what they asked for. They asked for some movable goals, but they've had a rethink on that and they've decided to return.
Well, as the joke goes, they'd asked for some movable goals, and then with the changing coach, they moved the goalposts. So the money came back. They were invited to submit an alternative grant for us to consider, but
well, they might.
so they can always come back in the future. But yeah, they chose not to for the time being.
So, does anybody have any questions about the income side of things? No? Okay. And then on the expenditure side, I tend to just pick out things that, that are worth commenting, I suppose. Staff training training of staff and of councillors might be quite a stretch this year. I think I probably undercalculated what councillors were going to want training wise, and I think having the assistant clerk as well is going to bump up the training needs there as well. So that may become a bit sticky at some point. It doesn't. We've got tons of money in general reserves we can use for these kind of things if we do go over. I probably undercalculated that. The salaries seem to be on target. Elections, as you can see, we wouldn't normally have 30,000 quid in that pot. It's normally 5, and we basically move the 5 into an earmark reserve every year because it costs around. I don't think it does ever cost 30,000. We're told that we need 30,000. I think normally we spend sort of 20,000+.
So we had quite a few elections this time, which will help us get a good idea about how much we need to create.
Yeah.
Is there any indication from Kirklees what the bill's going to be?
No, not yet. No, we normally get it sort of November time it comes in.
So is there a formula in some way that they work, where they're running district and parish elections alongside each other?
Yeah, it depends. The recharge does depend upon exactly how it's done. So I think pretty much they do it 50-50 as long as parish runs alongside Kirklees runs. You can have it run slightly differently. So you could effectively have one room. So rather than doing 2 at the same time in one space, you might have a half and half. And if you do that, that's going to require extra officers, so they'll bill you extra for that. So, but historically, we and the other town and parish councils have just let Kirklees crack on with running the elections. They're the ones with the knowledge, the experience, and the resources to do it, and the proper officers for running elections sit within Kirklees. So again, we get a bill, and when that bill comes, it'll drop to F&M, and I'm sure that we'll all be keen to see how much it is, because we will need to start putting money aside for the next 4 years, and the bigger the bill is, the more the impact's going to be.
I guess there'll be ad hoc sort of elections in there as well.
Yeah, it can be.
So
Yeah.
is that factored in?
Yeah.
We're always going to have odd ones, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you got yours, I think it was like 3,000 quid or something like that. Well, I think there were 2, weren't there? I think it cost like 4,000 quid or something like that for those 2. Yeah.
So you'd hope there's a bulk discount,
We normally put 5,000. We normally put 5,000 in, which either pays for that, the kind of ad hoc elections, or it slides into the earmark reserve and builds up for the 4-year cycle kind of.
It's obviously a co-option, no election expenses, just administrative time. If if you
money
just go to an
matters,
election.
co-option is your opinion, but the public can ask for an election if they want.
Insurance is done. That's more of an administrative thing. I need to work out how I can move that £1,000 from general reserve rather than through a budget line. But that's something I've got to discuss with our accounts people who do the programme. And then a budget that has nothing in, but we had some unanticipated expenses, so I just had to kind of pay it. Really was for the Home Moss topograph, which is I think it's going in at the end of this month. So we just tried to expedite some of the things to do with payments that came out of nowhere in terms of planning, and Yorkshire Water wanted to make sure that nobody could steal it, so we had to have risk assessments on. We had to have risk assessments on how easy it would be to cart the thing away on the back of a truck or something. So that will cost a bit of extra money. So I don't particularly have any further actions on income expenditure, but if anybody else has anything that they want to.
Any questions before we move on? So we go to part 5 plus earmark reserves.
Yeah, so earmark reserves, I don't know whether you all know what earmark reserves are, but in terms of the money that the parish council's got, we've got our budget, our working money that you see that we just discussed really, where we've got like 29,000 in elections, we've got 1,000 for chairman's expenses, all that kind of stuff is in the budget. So that's the first thing. Then we've got general reserves, which is essentially money that's not been set aside for anything, but it's kind of if we need money for something, like for example, say we needed something to fix this building, we had a terrible disaster or something, Mr. Wilson, yes. and we needed a big lump of money quickly. That's kind of what the general reserves are for. But on top of that, we have other sorts of reserves which are called earmark reserves. And earmark reserves have been basically identified by the council as being for specific things. So we've agreed that they're important, things that the council values. So as you can see, we promised Home Valley Scouts £2,000 towards their new Scout Club, but we kind of said to them, get some more money first and then we will give it to you, basically. But I pester them about it every sort of 6 months. How are you getting on with your Scout Club? But it's not been a lot of movement, but that's basically sat there for whenever they need it. The election fund, as you can see, is now down to 0, but we will be topping that up every kind of site every year until, as it says, we're back to sort of 30,000.
So on that one, that money from that earmarked reserve is then moved across to the current budget, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So when the bill comes in, there may be some money then that will drop back to the earmarked reserves.
Exactly.
Just depends.
The Civic Hall's got 10,000 in. I know there was discussions about this at Service Provision, about how they were going to use that. And then we've got 50,000 in an earmarked reserve for children's playgrounds, which probably the council needs to discuss more, because it was put aside for it, but I don't think there was ever a real understanding about how we were going to use it. So this is something that the council needs to work towards deciding how much of a priority it is, how you're going to commit it, the relationship with Kirklees if you go ahead, and so on and so forth.
Can I just ask, where does that sit, that decision making on that particular
That,
item? Who's leading on it?
It wasn't really decided. I mean, I think that's part of the problem, really. I think it's probably sits with council, but
If it's not delegated, it'll be full council.
But it's up for decision in a sense. It's probably something that needs to come to council. It will need to come to council anyway, just to make that decision. It's where people think it sits.
Well, the easiest bit would be, as where finance and management, would be to make a recommendation to full council for full council to consider. But full council could do that in itself if it chose to do so. So
I think it is on their agenda. So I think when Jen's doing the agenda, I'll get to nudge it that way.
just before we move on, could you just yeah, I'll come back to it. Could you just talk about the general reserves recommended level, if you would do?
Oh yeah, okay. So we are not allowed to have limitless amounts of money. In the past, I think in previous councils, they kind of liked the fact we had a lot of reserves, just in case something came up that we wanted to buy, or in case of emergency. But not legally is not the right word, but in terms of our auditing process, the government essentially wants us to only have a certain amount of reserves. We're considered a large, smaller council. Because we're a large, smaller council, we're not expected to have a ton of reserves, like for example Kirklees would have, but we're expected to have more than, you know, a small kind of village council. In our case, we're meant to have a quarter of our annual expenditure. So we're meant to have 3 months in reserve. The reason for this is in case, for example, our precept didn't come through for some reason, or you know, a disaster came in, like I've just said. It's there as contingency to pay for staff, to pay for the toilets to be maintained, to pay for the bus service. So all of our kind of regular things will keep being paid out of that contingency, basically.
Is that about 80,000?
Yeah, it's between 80 and 90,000 at the moment. We've got more than we thought we were. I mean, it does give us a bit of play in what we do this year. It gives us a bit of play in terms of our what we ask the public for in terms of the budget, because we do have an extra 40 or 50,000 that we could commit, rather than, for example, having to raise the charge to households. So that's something to be aware of. We'll obviously discuss that nearer the time.
Thank you. So,
oh, sorry, Andy, sorry.
I'm just on the amounts. I mean, if I sort of maybe oversimplify it, it's just a way of rolling, or it could be seen, it's just a way of rolling money, unspent budget from one year to the next.
It can be. I mean,
Could it also be used for what we've just been talking about? If we've got too much in reserve, we could
oh yeah, absolutely.
create an EMR for something.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's got to be real. I think that's the point. It can't be kind of a made up thing just to balance the books. It's got to be real.
One of the principles behind precepting powers is you only tax what you need to deliver what you're planning to deliver, rather than constantly building up a whole lot of money in the background. So that's where that general reserves bit comes in. But there's also then, that means that there does need to be quite a firm decision process around those earmarked reserves, so that they're not seen as somewhere to squirrel away more money. But some projects do run over, some are late, some change, and that's what the earmarked reserves are there for. So there may come a time, but who was it that you'd said? It was the Scouts, wasn't it? So there may come a time where we might decide to withdraw some of the offers of funding, if that's what the council decides to do.
Yeah.
It's
You can't sit there forever.
So apart from the fact of having to go to full council for the earmark reserves, we can, within reason, do what we want.
Yeah. Well, as long as they're doing what they're set out for. I mean, you'll know from the road safety one. So we've got an earmark reserve for road safety. And that's overseen by the planning committee, and it's basically to promote a range of potential road safety management issues, isn't it? Like, we've considered 20-mile-an-hour zones, we've considered speed cameras. Councillor Greaves has brought us this thing of
those kids.
kid codes.
So a variety of things to make the Home Valley safer, and so basically those things are discussed at planning, and once you've assembled a case, you take that to council votes on it, because only council can approve payment from the earmark reserve. It's just a recommendation from the committee.
So that nicely covers the 0.6, doesn't it? The planned underspend, if you like, so that road safety budget and the welfare market. So the bit we've missed, if you could go back, is
It's climate emergency, but
Yeah.
yeah, I can't say I was too impressed with letting them move all the money, move all their unspent money into an earmark reserve, but that was voted for. I think, well, you know, what my point was, is for the last several years they didn't spend the money, so how, on what grounds could they keep it? Don't, you know, spend it, if it's there, spend it.
So it's back onto that, the purposefulness of it, and about setting an accurate budget and then delivering what you've committed to do.
Exactly, your
So
budget
they're
is
all-
to be spent.
They're all strong disciplines, and that you know, you're taking taxpayers' money, you're taking it for a reason. You need to deliver on what that reason is, and there's lots of stuff that happens along the way that's legitimate. But I think one of the tricky bits for that particular committee is getting things up and running and the pace of change and trying to figure out where to land things. But that might well be, if progress isn't made with that might be another one to look at in the future. Money should not be sat there for a prolonged period of time, certainly not within earmarked reserves without purpose. And then if it drops into general reserves, then you're back to, well, what's the indicated amount to retain?
And I suppose that's where I was leading to, that if we just end up putting more and more in EMRs, at some point we always say, well, all you've done is
Yeah.
you've
Had
moved
your
it out of
EMRs,
reserve
that's
into
right.
EMRs. So
Yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, I mean,
you need to either spend it or give it back.
yeah, but I suspect that EMR road safety will get spent.
Yeah.
I suspect, you know, I know
The vast majority will.
there's discussions
Yeah, most of them.
in service provision about, you know, making a more long-term plan with regard to earmark reserves for the community assets.
But just to go back, so the children's playground, that was one where we had an idea about it, and we set a budget that would reflect the level of need across the valley. But then actually, Kirklees Council's playable spaces strategy rolled in with a revamp for the vast majority of areas, and then it was felt like, well, actually, do we need to do that? So that's one where kind of events have overtaken a decision. The money was earmarked because it's a case of, well, are there going to be some spaces? Is that provision going to be there? It's something to consider. But at some point, sooner or later, it needs to be decided upon whether that's the right place for it to be.
Yeah, you know, back to your point, Annie, the bit that I've said there at the bottom is exactly what you're saying, that, you know, you can constitute an earmark reserve from general reserves, or, you know, disassembling a current earmark reserve. That's what the council can decide.
And is it this group that will oversee that and say,
Well,
we think,
Well, no, not really. Every committee can propose it as part of their budgeting process. That's what they will be expected to do. This committee can do its own, and then this committee will make judgments on all of those. I mean, there was lots of moving amounts around last year.
So in terms of process-wise, all those committees might put stuff in, and we might put stuff in, but actually in terms of them monitoring that, that's the role of F&M. And well, we would also perhaps raise, so say for playgrounds, we might raise the point that time's come for a decision to be made. So then that would be back to that regional committee, would it not?
Yeah.
So there's that process to go through.
Can I just ask a question about playgrounds? My children don't live near a Kirklees playground, so it's fine, it's not related. So the playground situation, obviously I've seen on Facebook, there's loads of whinging about playgrounds, you know, there's not enough stuff on my playground, So the children's playground situation, is that just because you're waiting for Kirklees that nothing's moved on it, or is it because nobody, because I'm not being funny, but I think that sort of sits in, and on that committee, service and provision, sits in service, provision, that you're a playground, is it not, maybe? So,
Did he come from something? Where did he come from?
Not really. I mean, it kind of came from council, I suppose.
because everybody does moan about the playgrounds, don't they? There's not enough this, there's not enough that.
But Okay, so just
So,
answer
so my
that.
question was like, how
Yeah.
do you move it forward? So how do you move the 50 grand forward?
Okay, so that's not necessarily the role of this committee.
Mm.
This committee, in terms of the oversight and monitoring of the council's finances, may pose that question to whichever part of the council formed it in the first place. This money sat here, what you're doing about it. Specifically around that. So the play areas are Kirklees' responsibility. So at the point this came through, we were looking to top up because there looked to be quite considerable shortfalls. Since then, actually, the work plans for a lot of the play areas have been quite extensive. And you probably find that one play area refurb would take that entire budget and then some. So we were only looking at maybe topping up in some areas. So events have overtaken it really. Like with anything, even when you've refurbed a wreck and spent maybe £80,000, there's always going to be a queue of people saying in mind, "Oh, where's my slide? And where's the other bit?" So whatever you spend, there's plenty of opportunity to have spent a lot more. But it's really a case about Kirklees' responsibility, and I think the view was taken that actually Kirklees are doing enough there for us not to be worried about there being gaps, and that's why it's fallen back as it has been. But it's not necessarily for us to take the decision, it's for us to flag up the question around is sat in the earmarked reserves, what's happening with it, and to pose that question. Okay. So, any more indicators?
So, are we flagging that up for the main councillor? That's
Well,
going
I
forward.
think
Is
that's
that
the
the
one to
scenario?
take. Well, that is the one to take forward from this meeting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the client will need to just double check which part of the council it was that created it. But I think it was for the council because I think it originated as a grant, and then that discussion. So for one area, then the discussion was, well, if we're doing it for one, where's it go for everybody else? Which is then where the 50,000 came from. But I think that was. Can you recall?
I vaguely think it was F&M, but I'm not certain.
It's that F&M because it was a grant. But I think
It was about
But-
2.5. It was 3 budgets ago, I reckon.
it's the job of
No,
the job of the RFO to work out where it
I think it's from council.
Yeah, I think it. I
Well,
think
we
it-
definitely voted for it at council.
Yeah.
When we were at Hayridge.
And then a quick question, instead of being playgrounds, could it be school playgrounds?
No.
Just actually playgrounds?
Unfortunately,
You
definitely
need
not.
to read the findings of the working party that Mary said she would circulate. They were on the list. On the grounds that if you give to one school, you're more or less obliged to give them all. We've got 22 primary schools. And that it's Kirklees' job to look after schools, not the parish council. We decided we would only give money, even to parent teachers associations and things, if it was benefiting the wider community. If a school was developing a garden for everybody in the village to use, we would consider giving them money. If they wanted to improve the playground for their own children, there's fence around it, we would, I mean, to put it crudely. And similarly, churches,
Well, there's a difference. For churches, there's a legal restriction
there are, yeah.
in terms of what you can spend. I think that's okay. Well, sorry.
It's just Rich, on the EMAC reserves for the climate emergency projects, you said they've put that money into EMAC reserve because they've obviously underspent on their budget. Can you indicate how much they're underspent on their budget that's in that reserve?
All of it, wouldn't it?
No, it wasn't tons. It might be that about 8,000. I can find out for you. I think it was like 8,000.
We're going to move forward with discussing the playgrounds at the large meeting, and potentially that consideration of their budget might well be part of that meeting as well.
But their committee hasn't met yet, it hasn't.
No,
I just don't know if we don't know how it's going to work, but it's probably consideration to keep an eye on it, that's all.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, our role collectively is to keep an eye on all of these budgets. You know, and try to make sure that people are spending what needs to be spent and not spending what doesn't need to be spent and using reserves appropriately and so on.
So it's just mindful you said that earmark reserves aren't for just squirreling money away, they're for a set purpose.
Yeah.
If they haven't got a set purpose,
Exactly.
that kind of defies the earmark reserve, doesn't it?
So for this meeting, I think it's right and proper that we take forward the children's playgrounds and ask full council what we're doing with that. At the next meeting of FNM, after the climate change meeting has got together, then we might be asking them that question about what's happening with it, but they need a chance to start figuring out what their work plan's going to be before effectively being challenged on how they're going to.
And they're a new committee, they've been put together.
I would say about earmark reserves as well, they're not just intended to be, you know, you can have an earmark reserve planning for something to be done in 10 years time, you might have like 5,000, say we're going to put 5 in, we know that the roof's going to be probably...
Well, election's a good example of that, isn't it?
Election's a good example.
And so we say 3, but we never know what the bill's going to be, but it's, you know... it's
So they could have an earmark reserve that's got a plan for 4 years, and that would still be legit. It's not, but you know, it's getting the plan in the first place. I think is the key. Yeah.
So I'm just going to go back for a vote on this. So I'm going to move it from the chair about referring the earmark reserve for children's playgrounds to full council. I've got a seconder in Councillor Lyles. All in favour? Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
So item 28, risk assessment.
Again, sorry, another quite a boring document. It's just something that I've had to add because we took taken over the library since I did the last one, and our internal audit is this week, so it has to be essentially approved before the internal auditor appears. I don't think there's anything particularly controversial. It's just a series of things that that we do to keep ourselves safe, our officers safe, you safe as councillors, and the public safe when they're using our buildings or resources.
Mary?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I maybe the first one to you, just to comment on the first table on the first page. Under insurance for unique items, it looks a little dated, the text there, doesn't it? Because it talks about the Tour de France and the Jubilee, so maybe it just needs updating a little. Sorry, have you got that?
Well,
She's on the first.
No, but those are our benches. Jubilee bench, Tour de France bench, World War
Oh,
bench.
and those
Seat,
benches.
says seats,
Ah,
Jubilee
right,
seat,
what's
Tour de
the
France seat, World War
Has
seat.
it finished then, Tour? Has it finished this tour?
Don't feel like it's fine to put it out.
So the big one will be the topograph, won't it?
Yeah.
As
That's a very fair point. That is not on there. But I mean, I don't know a great deal about it yet, to be honest. So yeah, that's obviously one to go on there. It's just on the library that I've added to this one.
And just another question, which was on, I think, embarrassed about this, but Home Barn, what is the first time I've come across Home
Okay,
Barn?
so the allotments.
I assume it's at
in
home,
home,
the allotments, yeah.
There's a little stone shelter where they keep the gear.
It's quite
So-
a big.
Well, actually, it's,
Yeah.
yeah. And in the past, there's been some disrepair issues with it.
Yeah.
So it's on there because, well,
It's worth quite a lot of money.
yeah, and it's a fair size because of its setting and its construction. It would be a considerable cost if there were major works to do.
It's beautiful. I would say it's a beautiful building.
It's nice to see that infused
I
council.
just see you when you return.
I am not a gardener.
Pat, would you want to raise some?
I just wanted to say, for new councillors, and indeed for some of the old ones, Richard's referred twice to the internal audit. We have 2 audits a year, the external audit and the internal audit, and they're both done by external auditors. It's not done by councillors and the internal audit is done for the benefit of the council and the councillors and the officers, and the external one is done with the public in mind. But internal doesn't mean we just audit our own and appoint an internal audit.
So just one other point to cover on the risk assessment. So you'll see on there the topple tests at the closed churchyard.
and the one above it, which is New Mill. So just as a historic anomaly, if you like, this parish council has landed for the responsibility of the closed graveyard at the New Mill Church at the one up at Sue Hill. That's because when it was closed, the option to take on responsibility for it was offered, and the councillors at that time took it on. It's an unusual decision in that you're offering to take on a liability from the church, who then pester you relentlessly about repairing stuff that they weren't particularly bothered about. But I'll leave that one to a side, but that's just the history of that one. We've got it, and we're stuck with it. Any more questions on the risk assessment?
Well, I'll have to say to Richard, I say this to anyone that does risk assessments for, I say community groups, organisations. I do appreciate the hard work you do for risk assessments, because I know that with other people I know that actually do risk assessments can be a bit painful. It can be a bit painful and very lengthy. So, yeah, appreciate it.
Item number 29, the AGAR. So probably the most important document that the council produces in the financial year. Oh,
Yeah, you do, yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So I'll move it from the chair. Do I have a seconder for that, or to accept the current risk register as with those proposed amendments? So, to note, so as Pat mentioned, we've got an internal auditor who looks at control processes, and they're coming to visit us
Yeah, Dave, tomorrow, yeah.
Wednesday.
Is that right, yeah?
Yeah.
Dave, tomorrow. So she basically looks at all our books, she looks at our policies, she makes sure that we're doing things properly in terms of reclaiming VAT, paying VAT properly, making sure that we're paying pensions properly, and that the council's paying its national insurance contributions correctly, all sorts of stuff like that. She looks at everything we've done in terms of payments and expenditure, and it's quite involved. We're gradually getting better. When I started, it was a little bit messy, and we were doing it with spreadsheets. We've got like a proper accounts package now, which fortunately I just put stuff in and it churns out paperwork, so it makes things a lot easier for me in terms of doing this process, because it was very, very complicated in the first year.
So who was the internal auditor?
Her name is Safia. She's been a clerk for many, many years, and as a sort of side, she tends to get sort of parachuted into failing councils and sorts them out. So she's usually got horror stories about councils here, there and everywhere.
But she came to us because of her skills rather than because of her lifespan. I hope.
She's not on our door actually, and she's looking for work. So. And she's been an excellent internal auditor, really, really good. She's very knowledgeable. She helps us trying to improve what we're doing. She knows her job and my job better than I do, so I'm gradually picking things up as I'm learning from her. So again,
Pat?
I'm
I
sorry,
just wanted to
sorry.
say, it's and following on from Isaac's comments, that Rich's contribution here is massive. When I was first a councillor 4 years ago, the AGAR, the audit came up with a list of things that needed attending to, putting right, more attention paid, and we're down to about. She struggles now to find something wrong with us for 4 years, and that's been Rich's hard work.
So we'll move on to the AGAR now. So, Rich, if you can just take us through that before we look through it.
Yeah. So again, I appreciate, particularly for new councillors, it's hard to understand really what is going on. It's difficult to vote on things when you're just relying on figures on a page and, me putting these things before you. These figures you've got on the accounts records are basically churned out by our accounts package. I do separately keep a rolling spreadsheet where I am basically using our spreadsheet to make sure that the accounts package is correct. So we do have two systems ongoing at one time, and they did match all of that year. I suppose a few interesting things to point out about them is, if you look at our balances, you'll note that our balances have been going down. They've gone down by 26,000. If you look at our payments, our staff costs went up by 14,000. Our other payments went up by about 40,000. And our balances in the last year alone went down by £70,000. And that's because of what we were talking about before, where we're encouraged to only have 25% in general reserves, and we've had far too much in general reserves. So that's why these figures are coming down. Next year we'll probably come down even more, because we've still got too much. We've got about £50,000 too much. So as I said before, when we're talking budget-wise in the autumn meetings, in the November meetings and December meetings, we need to be conscious of that money that can be factored in to hopefully save some money to people in home value, I suppose. As well as the other stuff, there's some other stuff that we have to include. Am I okay just going through the?
Yeah.
So we have to publicise it to the public. Basically, they can come in and look at our books. So we have to lay them out for them. They can go through whatever they like in terms of our payment processes, our accounts records, everything they like. And it's I think it's the first 30 working days after the 1st of July. It must include the first week in July. So I've what you're deciding today is going to go to council on the 26th of June, I think it is, whenever council is later this month. So you'll be recommending to council this or this with amendments, and then council will approve it, and then the actual announcement will be on the 27th, and then people can come in from the 28th to the 8th of August. And I mean, to be frank, I mean, let them come in and see it whenever they like, but legally that's what we have to do is those days. So they can come in and check over whatever they want at that point. Well, and then the other stuff again is there's a number of additional documents that we have to fill in. If we are way over or way under on anything, our external auditor asks us to comment. So we haven't had to comment on most, but our staff costs went up. That's because the clerk took on some extra hours last year. She went up to 32 hours from 25, so that in part is that we got a pay rise that was quite, relatively speaking, large because of the economic crisis, I suppose, and we got some target related pay uplifts as well. And then the other one was all of the payments where I had to comment on how much of that changed. So anytime anything was above 20% variance, you had to comment basically, and so I had to include all the wherever our payments have gone up. As I mentioned earlier, our payments have gone up much, quite a lot. So our auditor wants that accounted for essentially. So that was another thing that was counted on. And then the final ones are things like, because we're a sort of larger, smaller council, we can't just put down receipts and payments. We have to account, quite complicated this, but we have to account for payments and receipts in the year that they apply to. So I have to list, if for example we get the electricity bill in May, but it applies to April, I have to kind of factor it backwards. So that's what this reconciliation between box 7 and box 8, and I know it's impossible for you to look at, but all that's got to happen is that these figures, if you add on or subtract these debtors and creditors, that figure comes out at the bottom. Again, this is all done by a computer program, so it all works perfectly, fortunately. I don't have to do anything with that. So, and I think that's basically it. Then, as you can see, the end one is just when we tell Kirklees Council what our pre-step request is, we basically send them a letter you know, and our precept amount is calculated on a tax base that is calculated by Kirklees Council. That's it. That's all I've got to say really on that.
So, I'm going to move it from the chair, so I'm looking for a seconder. The proposal is to accept the AGAR and to recommend it to full council on the 26th of June. Got a seconder with Councillor Lyles. All in favour? Thank you. Right. Item 30, tenancies, both to note.
Yeah, I mean, I've already said that anyway, that the Gartside building continues to pay on time. There has been some work done on the shop. He's actually going to get an address at last, not just the building access to the toilet, so that's good. And the allotments and garages, we've had everything.
Brilliant. So, no questions? Item 31, the internal control check. Sorry, Isaac, did you want to raise a question? So, item 31, the internal control check. So, as well as having an internal auditor who looks at the processes of the council and an external auditor, we also have an internal control check, which is done on a quarterly basis, and that's normally a councillor. So I did it last time, but the policy of the council is not to have the chair of the finance committee doing it, because normally I'll be signing some of the chits. So you want somebody who's separate from it to keep an eye on it.
Well, I don't sign any checks, so I'm happy to volunteer.
So we're looking for a volunteer.
Well, I do my own accounts and my VAT returns and stuff, so.
Well, I mean, it'll need to be proposed and...
Yeah. So, there'll be those shortages of seconders, I'm sure.
For a second.
I do it anyway,
So all in favour of the appointment of Joe? Now, I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit with this, I think, perhaps. Under councillor training and induction, one of the conversations I've had was the National Association of Local Councils offers a training course on finance for local councils. So the council has a training budget, and I thought it might be helpful for whoever's doing that, either to do that course or to have a bit of time with Rich beforehand, just to understand how the accounts are presented. When's the next one due, Rich?
Well, about now, yeah, July.
Well, we'll do it together then, Rachel.
Yeah.
So for that first one, you might just want to allow I don't know, an extra half hour or something like that, so that Rich can take you through it. If there's any questions or queries, then by all means talk to them with Rich. If there's anything that's still outstanding with that, raise it with myself or with Councillor Blacker, chair of the council. Okay. I don't expect it to be, but if there is, let us know.
I know, Councillor Colling, you did the internal control.
I did that training, and it was worthwhile. It was useful, but it was really pitched at clerks more than councillors, to be truthful.
Okay.
But it was useful. It made me feel more confident about it.
Well, see how we get on. Let us know. Okay, so item 32, banking.
Just to note, the first bit, we've got vastly more councillors able to sign payment authorisations than we've had before, so we'll be sharing the load a lot more than Councillor Hockley and Councillor Bellamy were last year, so I'll look forward to grabbing you anytime there's a meeting. So the idea is now that if there's a meeting, I will be targeting some of you mandated councillors at the beginning and getting you to sign stuff. So hopefully you won't be coming into outside meetings to sign stuff.
The second part of that then is simply to know that in August we're going to have a bit about changing the bank.
Yeah, can I we might not do it. So the thing about the banking is, as I said earlier, it's the council is at risk in that at the moment because I do do anything. I could basically take all the money, and it would take some time perhaps before it was known that I'd taken it. I would hope that HSBC will notice this. I mean, they have picked up on the past when I paid Honley Library a cheque for 15,000 and 10,000, 2 cheques in a week, and they noticed that and put a hold on our account. So that was interesting. So they are checking. They are checking. Yeah. But what we voted to do last year, and I suppose it will have to be voted again, was to move over to a different bank called Unity Trust Bank. And what that does is, I would set up the payments, but I can't make the payments. The payments will be made by one of these mandated counsellors who perhaps will just go with the same ones we picked before. They have to log on to the bank website basically, and 2 of them need to click pay, and only when the second one is paid does the payment get made. So that takes away a whole different level of potential for fraud. And they do look like a generally good bank as well as that. So that's we'll be going to the next meeting. I didn't put it to this one because it was quite a lengthy thing with lots of documents.
So, item 33, financial records for the website. So to note, the financial records for April 23 have been added to the website. May records will be added.
Yeah, I've got the back statement now. So it'll be this week.
And then item 34, councillor training induction. So this is just a note, we've got this induction training session. I recommend it to all. Is it Nalk who's delivering this or
No, it's Jenna's doing it.
Okay. And then, so if you wanted to do it, let her know. But I think it'll be really helpful. There's been a lot of questions raised, understandably, but there'll still probably be even more. And some of the areas it's going to cover just might help in terms of getting you more comfortable in the role. But it's entirely down to you. Okay. I think that concludes the meeting. So we're before 9 o'clock, but we've.
Well, we need to do.
Yeah, it's all right. Because I've got it here. And then, sorry, item 35, publicising the work of the Home Valley Parish Council. So, is there anything arising that we need to?
Well, I mean, there were several things I've written here. Obviously, we've got the grants process I've got to put in. I've got to flag all them up. If any of you working with community groups who make sure that you flag stuff to them, comment to their Facebook group pages and so on and so forth.
It's about the existence of the grants and where to find the documentation. Yeah?
And then obviously the AGAR and all that sort of stuff will go to Facebook, will go to website. We have to put them outside on the notice board as well. I don't know if there was anything else from the meeting, possibly not.
Anything from today? No. Okay. I'll close the meeting.
Yeah. Good
Before
job.
9 o'clock.